Hello, everyone. This is Justin Antoni Pillay. I'm the founder and CEO of WireWheel, and welcome back to our multi-part webinar series on privacy that we're hosting jointly with AWS. This webinar series is focused on actually bridging between the technical side of the house, chief technology officers, chief security officers, and then the folks who are handling privacy around an enterprise, which could be chief privacy officers, your legal compliance side of the enterprise, or even operations, which is often jumping in on privacy on a daily basis. In our first part of the series, Trevor Hansen and I from AWS, who I'll introduce in a moment, covered an introduction to the AWS shared responsibility model. And we did an introduction to privacy and the major issues that companies are having to tackle one by one. So if you missed the first part of the series, it's available as well. So please feel free to start there. And today we're going to be covering a number of issues, and we're excited to be joined by Stefan Gehring from Blackboard, who's one of our WireWheel customers, who's going to be talking about privacy by design and how they tackled those issues using WireWheel and AWS. So today we're going to start by just picking up where we left off, talking about the shared responsibility model on AWS and how WireWheel fits into that. We're going to give a quick reminder of Privacy 101, where we're bridging again between some of the privacy requirements and covering it in a way that even if you don't have a full-time privacy person in-house, you can start thinking about how to manage a privacy program and what those key elements are. And then we're actually going to go through a case study on exactly how Blackboard is managing privacy by design with WireWheel and AWS. So let me start by introducing my two panelists here. Trevor Hansen from AWS. Why don't we start there?
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm really glad to be joined with you guys today. I'm excited to have WireWheel and Blackboard in the same room. It's always exciting to be working with a partner to essentially, prepare software that companies can use in their day-to-day applications. And it's really, it's something that we at AWS is, always working backwards from the customer. And I'm excited to have Blackboard actually share that journey and what they've been exposed to, and all the hard work that you guys have put in at WireWheel. And I'm glad to just provide a bit of a recap on the shared responsibility model. Thanks for joining. And if you guys have anything that you would like to cover in follow-up series of this webinar, please feel free to reach out. We'll be glad to provide that in future webinars.
Awesome. And Trevor, you're kind of the technical, speaking for myself, you're the technical voice of this series. And for those of the folks who are watching who weren't able to join for the first one, do you mind giving just a moment or two on your background?
Yeah, so I've been with AWS for just over 3.5 years now. I originally joined the company working in our premium support, supporting our wide range of APIs for enterprise companies. And I got to experience everything from, the small startups busy looking at using AWS all the way through to the big enterprise companies that were going all in on AWS and going through that, 300 to 5,000 sort of migration of the applications and having to, navigate through that journey of, replatforming the applications, making sure that security was baked in from, the ground up. And I've been exposed to, really interesting case studies. Passionately wanting to work with these companies and actually being part of that journey and, obviously providing education around there, diving in with the architecture and designing for best practices. It drew me towards working as a partner solution architect, specifically working with our software partners and designing, applications that can be used to enhance AWS experiences, to be able to improve that whole digital transformation with DevOps, and obviously security, security software that improves that security for, our customers that are using these applications today. And recently I started working on our startups, so specifically on the hot startup list, working with companies that, really are differentiated in the space. They're really solving problems for, our most demanding customers. And I'm excited to be working with these companies because they're really pushing the boundaries. They're really working closely with us and our service teams to ensure that, they're designing by best practice themselves to give their customers the best experience. And I'm glad to be sharing some of my thoughts with you guys today.
Awesome. And now to my other partner here on the webinar today, Stefan Gehring. Stefan's the Global Privacy Officer and Associate General Counsel at Blackboard. So Stefan, do you mind introducing yourself too?
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for having me. It's great to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about how we actually at Blackboard implemented privacy by design. Privacy and kind of the automation of a privacy process and tools is really key for us. And working with WireWheel and AWS is a fantastic opportunity for us to get to this, and that's what we're going to explain. I joined Blackboard about 1.5 years ago as the Global Privacy Officer, and before that I used to work in the financial services, both for Barclays, a UK financial services company, and also for Citigroup in various capacities in EMEA and Asia Pac, building up the privacy programs within those companies. And way back when I was still living in Switzerland, I used to work for one of the data protection authorities there as the Deputy Data Protection Commissioner, making sure that public authorities in that region were up to speed with all the privacy requirements and could help serve the customers and the citizens of that region.
One of the things we thought would be helpful for the community that engages here is you are a global chief privacy officer for a SaaS company. And so you're in the position of seeing what is a very typical challenge. You need releases and new features on a regular basis, a changing environment, a changing regulatory environment, and you want to be enabling your company to move faster. And that's one of the things that's been exciting about the way we're working is we're thinking about the privacy journey from the DevOps side all the way through product releases and then how you actually think about privacy as a feature. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today.
Same here.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I'm the founder and CEO of WireWheel. WireWheel is an advanced technology partner on AWS, and we're also available in the marketplace. We've been very excited with the partnership we've had with AWS and with Blackboard over these last few years. And having Blackboard as a customer has really helped us think about how to attack some of the problems that we see for a wide group of companies, especially SaaS vendors in the area. So with that, why don't we jump in, Trevor, and just pick off where we left off. What do you say?
Excellent. Thanks, Justin. So for those that are joining, just to provide some clarity, so when you talk about the APN, the AWS Partner Network, this is AWS's efforts to have a very close relationship with our software companies, that other customers that are using AWS can leverage this software to achieve certain things. And part of this journey, we really focus on that first technical enablement side. And this is where we work really closely with those companies to ensure that they're developing applications based on best practices. They're keeping their customers' data secure and safe, and just making it really easily accessible for companies, to be able to use the software from day one in the applications. So working with WireWheel, in order to get to advanced here, they would have to have gone through multiple different phases of assessments and architecture reviews, and working with software solution architects that look at their stack end-to-end to ensure that they're doing the right thing. And this is something that we, ensure that is in best place before we actually start working on that go-to-market and activities. We actually start working on educational content, highlighting case studies about customers that are using the software in a day-to-day. So I've been working with WireWheel. I've seen that journey from the beginning when I got engaged with them, and it's really been a pleasure to be working with Justin and their team. They're really passionate about this topic. They've done a phenomenal job getting to this point. And as I mentioned, I'm glad to have Blackboard here to just speak to that as well. As we covered in the previous webinar, we dived really deep into the shared responsibility model. And we created this from the beginning when we started making our first services available. Our service teams really worked at clearly indicating what AWS owns, what are we responsible for, and what our customers are responsible when using those services. And this is really a relationship between what AWS is going to be doing to ensure that you as a customer is safe using these APIs, where it be running workloads on AWS, if it's using, partner solutions, etc. These there's a clear line between, what data does AWS access have to? Are we able actually to do anything to those resources? And from the beginning, we determined that, AWS should not have access to any customer data. We made it very clear that, as a company that's using AWS, you choose to say, I want these services running, and you choose to what to do to ensure that that data is secure, that those workloads are running, etc.
And Trevor, if you don't mind, I think this is a good bridge for where Stefan and I come in. So both Blackboard and WireWheel are using AWS to deploy our applications. And I don't know about you, Stefan, but I get questions all the time that are focused on, well, if I put my data into WireWheel, as a user, or if we're using Blackboard to manage our educational technology needs, what do you have access to? What does AWS has access to? Do you get that question, Stefan?
Yeah, Justin, that's a really good question that we get really a lot, particularly from our customers in Europe. There's obviously a lot of concern just because of the connotation of a US cloud company. I think that's still a bit of a negative reputation with lots of our customers. And we always try to explain to them how much safer it is actually to get and move to the cloud. Because with us working with AWS, we can leverage their security infrastructure, the scale and the scope and the expertise that AWS has. We could never reach that, and companies like our size, we can't get to that level. So by kind of outsourcing that and kind of leveraging and partnering with AWS, we get a much more secure infrastructure where we know that data is safe, where we know that if there's ever kind of an instance of any issues that's kind of replicated instantly across regions, we don't have to worry about it all. We can update our software instantly without any issues. Compare that to kind of our previous, which is still running kind of managed hosting situation, that makes it much easier for our clients and it makes it much easier for us. And we have a lot of clients that just feel that just by having their server in their basement and seeing their server, it feels like more secure. But with all the issues of making sure that all the patches are updated regularly and making sure that it's secure, you as a company or as kind of a university as a client, it's a lot of work. You need to have the right experts, and it becomes more difficult and more difficult as the security kind of threats evolve. And it's very hard to keep up to that. So be able to kind of say, you know what, client, you don't have to worry about that. And we as Blackboard didn't need to worry about as much. We can help our clients by leveraging AWS and getting to a really high security level. That's a tremendous advantage for us and for our clients. And that's the point we're trying to constantly make.
So, AWS covers, we cover a wide range of APIs, and these are the services that are, from big data to, the plain old EC2 to services like S3 where you can actually store static files. We provide a wide range of database services, and you'll see that, there is a couple of different services where we actually start also, taking a bit more responsibility on our side, allowing you as a company to move a bit faster. And this is something like, for example, you may have heard this, the concept of containerization or serverless, something like Lambda. These are also, we may take a bit of responsibility on our side. We don't have to deal with the compute anymore. But you still need to make sure that the data that's flowing in and out of that service, you still own and you're responsible for using that API. So, for example, if you have something like a container, you may have a bit of code that's running in there. It needs to do something with some, bit of data. As a company, you need to make sure that you're using this in the correct way, that, you have that data encrypted in transit, you're encrypting it at rest, and that, you're using these things based on the best practices. I'm going to hand over to Justin so he can dive into a bit more on the WireWheel side. So thanks a lot.
Trevor, that was great. WireWheel can help as part of the shared responsibility model to be at least alerting your privacy team, hey, this is something that might matter to you, that enables the use of some of these technologies that are present on AWS. So we think of ourselves as a part and partner of the shared responsibility model, helping more automate privacy compliance as you use AWS services. And we're excited to be doing that.
Yeah. And this is what I absolutely love about WireWheel. You guys, you've designed it to really dive deep into these services to collect the right data and show this up to the right people in the right format at real time, which is fascinating.
I appreciate that. And that's, again, part of how we're thinking about it from a shared model. So, Stefan, I think it's pivoting to you and I on Privacy 101 and how we think about actually implementing a privacy program. And so, just by way of quick introduction, we're seeing companies that really care about privacy because it's a strategic issue. Our companies and the companies that are our customers care about it because it's a strategic issue, but also because they need to build trust with their customers. It's critical to sell your product. And so while almost every company thinks about regulatory risk, hey, I might face a fine. To be honest, when I'm thinking about it, running a company, and I suspect it's true for Blackboard and others, we think about what do our customers need. There was a survey that came out last year from Cisco where they surveyed 6,500 companies. 65% of those companies reported delays in closing deals because of privacy-related concerns, and that really would matter to me. And I suspect you see that too from your side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about privacy, we absolutely see it the same way as you explained. I mean, privacy is not just a regulatory issue; it's a client issue. And what we have seen, both kind of at Blackboard, also previous companies, I think a lot of the privacy standards are now driven by other businesses, by your clients, rather than by the regulators necessarily, which I think is a good thing. And clients, as part of that, are very, very interested in kind of getting visibility. Where's my data stored? Who has access to my data? And getting that visibility, not just as one-off, but kind of an ongoing process, is kind of why we chose to kind of work with Justin from WireWheel, because that's exactly what we need to have, this kind of ongoing and automated visibility. Where's the data, where it's being accessed from? And it helps us, as to your point, in terms of the sales cycle. I mean, we have so many requests for proposal with kind of very detailed due diligence questionnaire. And there's always a question around where you're hosting data, who has access to it, give me a list of countries where it is. And being able to kind of do that on an automated level will just kind of reduce that time. And for every kind of renewal of contracts, for any kind of client questions, where we can start doing that in a much more automated manner, it's going to reduce kind of our internal emailing around and using spreadsheets and thousands of people on a distribution list to kind of find things out. All that is going to start going away with kind of the help of WireWheel, and do that on a much more automated basis.
The data science side of the house is another thing we've really been thinking about, where if you think about data privacy compliance as just a compliance exercise and not as an enabling exercise to be able to responsibly use that data better, I think you're cutting off, part of the value of it. And so I think that's another place where, Blackboard really enables your customers to think about responsible use of that information to advance the customer's needs. And I think that's another thing that we're excited about over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, our client base, a lot of our clients, particularly kind of in Europe and Asia Pac, are higher educations, universities. And of course, they have a lot of information about the students as part of their learning management systems. They have grades in their assessments. And while some people may not consider as sensitive as kind of health data and financial services data, these universities care a lot about that data, and their students care a lot about that data. So for us to be able to give that visibility and gain that trust of our clients, and then in turn the clients can go to the students and explain how everything works and gain that trust, I think is critically important, because we see study after study that the trust in companies, particularly kind of technology companies, is really eroding, and kind of maintaining or building up that trust again through visibility is really, really important for us.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right, so we covered this in the last webinar. So obviously, please feel free to watch that. And we gave an overview about how this is moving. And the last part of this slide talks about the California Consumer Privacy Act. This has significant actual regulatory consequences for customers. It's going to affect next year, but it has a 1-year look-back period. So we might already be in the look-back period right now. And there are probably 4 or 5 other state laws that are following right behind. And I would not be surprised if a couple of them passed this year. So,
sorry, Justin, just to jump in very quickly. Yeah. I think that if you see that kind of with CCPA, and we see kind of similar kind of state law being kind of being drafted, and now obviously also the federal efforts around creating a federal consumer privacy law in the US, But it's also around the globe. I think kind of GDPR, the kind of that nice mechanism of adequacy that the EU has introduced to kind of push countries to go to a similar kind of level, really kind of shows kind of certain countries already kind of looking into their laws again, saying, oh gosh, now we have GDPR. Is that now the global standard? Do we need to look at our data protection laws? And we see Brazil has just come out with kind of a very kind of stringent data protection law that's quite close to GDPR. So we kind of see that in South America, we see that in Asia Pac, countries looking at the laws again. And so I think we're going to move to a level where we have these laws that are close to kind of the CCPA, GDPR level, which have extensive rights for individuals, stringent requirements on companies in terms of accountability and kind of demonstrating their compliance and being able to kind of demonstrate that to their regulators and the clients. So I think for any kind of company that operates globally, kind of all these things we're talking about around kind of data mapping, visibility, client trust, it's not just kind of a GDPR EU issue. It's not just kind of a California issue. It really is a global issue that you need to think about.
And the big picture for us, to focus on this next step is how these programs and what a company needs to do when you're thinking about getting started on privacy. And these are the three elements that we have highlighted that we're going to be much more specific about momentarily. Step one is, how do you run a privacy program? On WireWheel, we have the concept of privacy program in a box, where we give basic guidance on how to get started. What are you looking for? Here are the documents you need to produce, which we actually have captured. Things like privacy by design checklists, where you can enable your DevOps team to do it, and then a really powerful platform to manage a privacy program. And this is a completely SaaS product. The second thing we've highlighted is to enable CTOs and CISOs to empower the rest of their team to tackle privacy. And then to take it from, okay, now I have my privacy program stood up. We've empowered the team to comply. There are a lot of business problems that we're seeing come up that are not necessarily compliance driven. Have you seen that as well, Stefan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have lots of kind of clients that have kind of standards or requirements that go beyond what's legally required, and obviously we're trying to kind of accommodate them as much as possible and go much beyond what's kind of legally required. I mean, one thing is kind of the point of regional hosting. I mean, that's why AWS is a great partner, because our clients are keen to have their data regionally hosted, even though it may not be a specific legal requirement in a country. I think clients just feel more comfortable by knowing that their data is hosted in a region. And the same with kind of our data transfer approach, where we're kind of using redundant mechanisms, even if you could just have Privacy Shield, but we're going beyond that to kind of evidence to our clients how important this is for us.
Yeah.
I think I would like to add one thing there is, as you mentioned, there's some companies that are a lot more demanding even than currently requirements or certifications at the moment. What's really powerful is, companies like WireWheel and, like AWS, we working with those most demanding customers, and we're baking in that, those requirements into our applications so that you as a customer from day one can leverage on your applications today. WireWheel obviously working with their most demanding customers to make their application as feature-rich as possible to ensure that those companies are meeting their requirements. You as a customer using that platform have the same, tools for your team. So you could pretty much, being able to use something like Blackboard on AWS, you pretty much can say that, with confidence to your customers, you have that confidence internally because you have that visibility. And also you can provide the necessary information and confidence to your customers because they know that you're doing things based on best practices for the most demanding companies in the industry.
I totally agree. All right, so now, Stefan, this is a little bit of an introduction of the specific keywords. We hear these all the time. Just phrases that people think they need to do and how you go through that journey. So you're starting up, you've got your product in the market, it starts to sell. And now you have either you're starting to sell in Europe and you worry about GDPR. You have that product starting to sell in California, or you're offering it in California, or you have California customer records. What do you do? And these are the phrases that come up and how you stand up a privacy program. So taking the slide as a jumping off point, Stefan, do you mind walking through the journey of how you get started and what these phrases actually mean?
Yeah, sure. And feel free to jump in as well. I think the most important thing here is around why do you need to do this at all? And I think that's where we see with GDPR, but also with CCPA and other laws, is that there's a heavy focus on accountability of companies. So it's not just about just complying with the law. You need to be able to demonstrate and document it. So a regulator expects that they come to you with questions around where's your data, how is it flowing around, what kind of data do you have, that you can actually pull this out. You don't need 2 weeks to kind of try to figure it out yourself. You can actually pull this out of drawer instantly. And that's why it's so important to kind of use these various aspects like data flow mapping, where you want to understand not just where your data is hosted, but who are the teams, who are the departments who have access to that. And that could be you have a client support infrastructure and you have client support teams around the world to provide 24-hour support for your clients. So they may be located in the US, in Australia, wherever they are. So you need to understand that as well. Then in terms of data discovery and classification, it's very important that you understand what kind of data do you have. Is it data that is specifically protected under certain law because it's maybe sensitive health data and therefore considered sensitive under GDPR? Is it particularly protected children's data under COPPA in the US? So you need to understand what kind of data you have and kind of classify the sensitivity accordingly. And then if you move on to kind of the PIs and DPIs, I mean, these are tools that have been used before, but now with GDPR have become much more prevalent as well, which are privacy impact assessment and data protection impact assessment, particularly on the GDPR, with some very specific requirements around in the GDPR. But it basically means that if you develop a new product, if you set up a new process, if you create a kind of new marketing approach, you want to make sure that you understand what's the impact on the privacy of the individuals whose data you're collecting. What do you need to do to make sure that you're transparent? What do you need to make sure that the information is secure? How do you make sure you try to minimize that data that you're collecting so it's only really using what you need to use? So all these questions will be kind of played as a data protection impact assessment. And the idea is that at the end, you have a document that, again, you can show to your regulator, you can potentially show to your clients, kind of evidence that you have thought about all these questions and how you are privacy compliant. The more complex your organization is and products you use, even if you're in the cloud, if you have several products, then obviously things get a bit more complicated. And trying to kind of track that manually, we kind of just keeping in touch with all the teams is very, very difficult. So that's kind of why we decided to go for WireWheel, so we can kind of automate all around and get alerts and kind of get the visibility that we need. I think in today's world, to kind of try to do that kind of on a manual basis is almost impossible. That data inventory is kind of where you kind of try to kind of bring everything together in terms of kind of the data flows, the classifications, making sure you have kind of a central repository where all that data is being held, where you can get that visibility for yourself, for your regulators, for your clients. And I mean, the other thing to mention as the last point on the slide as well is in terms of consent. I mean, consent is a concept that has been kind of elevated to an extremely stringent level. But as much as you have to rely on consent under the GDPR, again, you need to be able to demonstrate that you obtained it. So you need to have that evidence. You can't just say, yeah, I've got consent. You need to be able to show that you got the consent from a client. So that's, again, very important, where you can rely on tools like WireWheel to kind of help you track this and make sure you can pull that out if need be.
Yep. And this is one of the slides we covered last time that I'm only going to cover momentarily, which is if you try to build your privacy program by looking at every individual law, you're going down quite a rabbit hole, because they're, first of all, different laws in different parts of the world. They have slight nuances. There's some basic fundamentals. But GDPR has 99 articles. There are a number of different major portions of CCPA. So we really have focused on a basic insight of focus on 4 critical things. And obviously, security is always critical, right? Security is critical to trust, but I'm going to assume that most of our viewers are thinking about security already. Trevor, it's part of what is built into the DNA at this point. So focus on what kind of personal data are we collecting or observing throughout the organization? What is it and where is it? That's a little bit of the data inventory concept. Just start with what you're collecting and what systems. Where are you storing it and where are you actually running your compute? This is why automatic tracking of your assets becomes so important, because it lets you understand, am I covered by Brazil? Am I covered by Japanese law? Am I covered by GDPR? And if you don't know where it's running, it's really hard to even start by figuring out which law you're ultimately going to comply with. And So those are 1, 2, 3. And then 4, who are you sharing it with and why? This is why vendor management becomes such a critical issue. Because if you're sharing it with a partner and you don't know who that partner is, you can really trip into some things. And the WireWheel platform really tackles it using these 4 critical elements. So I'm going to hand this over to Stefan and then just go through specifically how you're tackling these kinds of issues on the platform and with AWS.
I think the important thing is, again, kind of there's a lot of advantages to being in the cloud. And one of them is kind of being able to have this kind of automation of visibility and of tracking. And we as a company obviously want to make sure that we support our clients because very often on most of the laws around the globe, we are actually a service provider to our clients, the universities, the schools, the corporate entities that use our products. And therefore, we need to make sure that we can help them comply, even if we may not have the direct obligation to do so. So we're doing that, and we also obviously want to make sure that we're trying to help them kind of additionally with guidance and with other aspects in their privacy compliance efforts to support them and support their users. And of course, that's kind of the challenge that we gave to kind of Justin and WireWheel, the company, to help us with the commitment to kind of establish that trust through that visibility and through that automation of that privacy service. And that's why it's so great to have the partnership.
Now, I'll just, if you don't mind me jumping in, one of the things that we were excited about is Blackboard has taken privacy seriously for a long time. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You're working with educational institutions at all levels and universities, and there's probably, you can think of very few groups that care more about this, although it's really popping up all over the world. But students care about this; they really do, and so the universities that are collecting that information have obviously taken very seriously their obligation to be good caretakers of it. But Blackboard already, even before we started working together, provided an extensive amount of information and guidance about here's what you might need to do, here's how to think about the challenge. You've built into your platforms the idea of when you move to a SaaS version, for example, of Blackboard, Blackboard's not only taking care of things like giving you your particular features, but adding the ability to have elasticity and scalability and security built in because they're cloud hosted. And it takes one thing off of the list. And the thing we were excited about is with the technical information, the privacy guidance, you're already leaning very far forward on privacy. And this is, again, why working together to try and solve these problems in a more persistent way was exciting.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Justin. So I just wanted to very briefly talk a little bit actually what Blackboard does, just for kind of our listeners to give kind of an idea of what Blackboard is as a company. So Blackboard is a 20-year-old company, started with kind of a very basic learning management system, and kind of over the years really expanded the platform to things like a tool which is called Collaborate, which is a video kind of online virtual classroom tool. We also have capabilities and solutions in what we call the community engagement space, where we can kind of notify parents of children that tomorrow their work is due or the bus is late or whatever it is. Then we also help clients with kind of the whole student life cycle around enrollment, recruitment, the tuition and financial aid services around that. And also we have, particularly in the US, we have aspects around kind of the tuition payments, but also kind of financial payments on the campus that allow students to pay with our cards in the cafeteria, to get into the library, to get into their dorm rooms via our cards. So it's kind of a pretty broad spectrum of solutions that we have that also brings different data classes. So we have things kind of typical LMS information around grades and assignments and submissions around that. But then we also have video recordings, we have financial information, credit card payment information as well. And obviously that kind of requires different levels of security and kind of stringent requirements of privacy. But what we do is, independent of and regardless of the different types of data that we actually have established a really global baseline for our kind of privacy program. And we've really kind of looked at GDPR as that baseline. So we kind of really using GDPR as a global level for all our products and services and data categories that we have. And just on privacy by design, I want to provide a bit of background why we really think this is so important and kind of why I think that generally kind of in the privacy space there's a really strong trend to this. Privacy by design is actually quite an old concept. I think it was 1995 when Kavoki and at that point Data Protection Commissioner in one of the Canadian provinces came up with this concept and started to develop it. And it's actually quite a simple concept if you think about it. It's the idea that rather than if you have a product, then kind of at the end you're trying to kind of tweak it and change it and get it privacy compliant, actually you start building in security from the start. So as you start thinking about how should this product work, what's the architecture, you always include privacy and of course security as well from the start into that, with the aim that you really minimize the impact that it has on the privacy of individuals. And GDPR specifically kind of outlines a few things that you should think about. One's the kind of the aspect of data minimization that I mentioned, but also, do you really just need personal data, or can you actually pseudonymize it, strip out some of the direct identifiers? Can you actually fully anonymize the data? If you can do, fantastic. And then obviously also make sure that you can provide the individuals with control as much as possible. So give them transparency, explain to them how you use the information and how they can get access, how they can delete the information where possible. And not just that, but also make sure that when you have opportunities for users to have different settings for their profile in a specific product that you have, like an LMS, try to give them privacy-friendly standard settings. So you don't share with everyone from the start, but maybe only share with your class or with your specific department, and then they can open up if they want to.
I mean, if you don't have the right tools in place, you're lucky if you actually caught something that made it through to production that could make customers' data vulnerable in the first place. The real pain is when you're sitting there and you wake up in the morning and you see your company's name on the news saying that, data's been breached, like that's the last thing that you ever want to see. And having the right tool in place to make sure that it's not just a gatekeeper, but it's something that from the beginning picks up issues before even you get past the testing environments, that is essential. It won't actually even slow down your deployments. If you bake this in end-to-end in your application lifecycle, it can actually speed you up and, as I said, boost that confidence for you to be able to go find those customers and earn their trust.
Yeah, and sorry, just one thing to add. I think it's also very important kind of for kind of your company culture internally, because I think we're now using our privacy by design approach for a new product which is called Blackboard Data, which is kind of an enhanced Blackboard analytics tool. And we're working with them on a daily basis, probably too much for their liking, but on a daily basis, because it's really important that you kind of start working with them so they can explain kind of their idea, their architecture to you, and you can kind of say, okay, this is what we need to meet. So they understand from the start, okay, what will be the expectations? What do we need to build in? And how can we plan this out? To your point in terms of deadlines, I mean, if you kind of start doing that towards the end of a kind of development life cycle, that may delay your product launch drastically. And being involved from the start and kind of giving our product management, product development teams the right parameters so they understand what needs to be achieved, it's very helpful for them to kind of say, okay, we know we need to build that in, we know that's going to take so much time, so we can plan that in our kind of planning and development life cycles.
Totally agree. And we've been thinking about it from the product approach, which is how do you make the tool something that the development team loves, because it then accelerates their ability to spot these issues earlier. Trevor, to your point, we've taken it on from that challenge and built it in from that perspective. So back to you, Stefan.
No, thanks very much. On this slide, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of how we implemented privacy by design at Blackboard. And I mean, some of it may sound a bit boring, but I think it's all really important aspects of making sure that it actually happens. Obviously, you start with making sure that everyone understands what the requirements are. So we can create a standard under our global privacy policy that explains what's actually required, what the questions are, and at what point do you actually need to conduct a privacy by design checklist, and at what point do you need to conduct a data protection impact assessment. And we really combine this together with the data protection impact assessment, because I think for us it makes a lot of sense that we're almost using kind of a privacy by design checklist as kind of a mini data protection impact assessment. Even if it's not legally required, we think it's good practice to go through all the important questions. And then, of course, if you kind of trigger the requirements on the GDPR where you need to actually conduct a data protection impact assessment on the GDPR, then you have that trigger question or checklist and can go through that. And we also make sure that we link to kind of the product requirements that we define from a privacy and from a security perspective. And we link it very closely to kind of what we do from the vendor management process. To your point, it's very important that whatever we do in developing a new product, new process, that the aspects of vendor that are being engaged and may have access to your data is being considered. And last but not least, I mean, it really needs to be clear who is responsible for what. If you just kind of push something out and no one is responsible, it's not going to work. So we kind of have developed a network of what we call data privacy champions in our company, in each department and in each product group. And they're kind of responsible for shepherding and helping kind of the specific project manager to complete the privacy by design checklist or the data protection impact assessment. And then, of course, I'm the person that kind of gets all the questions and we don't know what that means and help us with this definition. And I'm going to help them and kind of review that and make sure I can clarify all the kind of the more tricky legal issues. And I mean, this is just an overview, kind of what I basically explained in a little bit, kind of how we set it up in terms of kind of the workflow, how we go through a privacy by design approach with the initial kind of threshold question around, is this actually a material change? And material change, of course, could mean anything. So we have a long list of examples and explanation in kind of our checklist to make sure people understand what would be considered material. And if the answer is no, of course, woohoo for the project manager because they don't need to complete the checklist. If yes, they go through that for the first initial very short checklist to kind of see, do they need to complete the data protection impact assessment, if it's high risk or not. And then based on that, they complete the full data protection impact assessment or the shorter checklist. And based on that, where required, we could go to the data protection authorities with the result and get their input as well. And that kind of helps us getting through that workflow quite smoothly in a defined manner.
And for us, just to bridge, to the folks who don't do privacy every day, one, the idea of setting up this in privacy, in a box where you can set up the basic understanding of here's what you do next is how we've been working together with Blackboard, where it tells you what to do next, how to gather that critical information and manage it more efficiently. And the ability to then create these, almost automate them to the point where, a smaller team that's managing a global privacy program is alerted when new ones come in, that you can manage it from a single pane of glass. That's what we've been excited about, is the idea that you can stand up a privacy program quickly, have the basic privacy by design checklist. It's about sharing that knowledge and creating automation around it that I think has been something we're excited about.
Yeah, and I can't remember if it's coming up in one of the next slides, but I mean, that's absolutely key. I think, yes, you could theoretically do this with an Excel spreadsheet or with some kind of Word document, but then how do you track that the project manager has completed it? How do you make sure that a privacy champion has seen it as well? How do you understand what's in progress, where you need to follow up? I mean, you really need an automated tool, and that's why we use WireWheel, where we can send automated reminder, we can chase people, we have a dashboard where we see what's outstanding, which makes this so much more efficient and manageable. So yeah, just wanted to kind of highlight three things that I think are really important for a privacy by design concept work into a company like us. I mean, the first thing, and it sounds very obvious, is make it known. So you really need to make sure that people know that there is a privacy by design checklist and they need to complete it. And one is training and awareness. You can do that. But I think equally important is that actually you get senior management support and really kind of the tone from the top of your company that they know this is a requirement. They can instruct their employees so that if an employee comes out, I have this privacy by design checklist, do you ever need to do this? And they say, yes, you do. So I think that's really important. And then the second aspect is really kind of to make sure that it actually happens, that people complete the checklist. And that is really tricky. And I would lie if it works perfectly in our company. And I think in no company it works perfectly. But there's quite a few things you can do to kind of help making sure that people really complete and follow the process. I mean, the most important thing is kind of show folks the benefit. And I think how I explain to our team is that, yes, you may have to complete that questionnaire, but before you basically did the same, you just did it through kind of email exchange back and forth 20 times. And now you have all the questions in one place. You completed it, I review it. And if I have any questions actually with WireWheel, I can just put in a comment online and you get the notification. You can respond to that. So it's all much more efficient and manageable also for those that actually need to complete the checklist. And then the other thing that what we did is that we kind of created so-called toll gates in other processes. So we're leveraging other processes that we have in the company, just like, for example, we have a CIO council that approves new technology projects or new kind of application that we use enterprise-wide. And one of the requirements for each of those reviews is that you need to complete the privacy by design checklist. Otherwise, you're just not going to get to that approval. And similar in a procurement process, we have kind of a one stop in that process that unless you have completed your privacy by design checklist, you're just not going to get to the end. So that helps you make sure that actually privacy by design checklists are being completed. And we use other teams as kind of enforcers, kind of helping us making sure that people are aware of this and really complete it. The legal team, of course, helps me doing this. Again, our procurement and vendor risk management teams, they flag it all the time that you need to complete this as well. So with all of this and with a bit of persistence, because you have kind of internal customers who don't like doing this, and you just need to remind them, no, we really need to do this because maybe tomorrow a regulator wants to see it and we need to kind of being able to pull it out. So this is really helping you making it happen. And what also helps is kind of from a kind of a last perspective is you really need to make it easy. And I think that's why it's important to partner with WireWheel, because it really needs to be easy for the end user who maybe sees this checklist for the first time to kind of go through this, that they complete this without too many questions for myself. They can do this without much hand-holding. And I think that's what we really achieve with the help of WireWheel, that is kind of intuitive questionnaire. Everything is online. If you have questions, you can kind of ask these questions through the tool. And if, of course, there are questions, we always help. But I think that reduces the questions that come up to me, that reduces my time that I need, that reduces time of our project managers that need to complete all of this. And it really is that automation that helps us do that, rather than just using kind of a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet that gets lost and maybe not stored in the right inventory or folder at the end. No, we can find it in 2 years. We have everything in one nice kind of tool, WireWheel. It enables us to kind of follow up, as I mentioned, remind folks that they need to complete this and kind of assign it. I mean, the assignment function is wonderful because then the project manager says, I have no idea about this particular question or security, but I know colleague A knows the answer. So they can just kind of click and send it on to this colleague. The colleague gets a notification, completes it, and it comes back, and we can track all of that wonderfully in a dashboard.
Awesome.
And yeah, that just kind of shows, I mean, on the left, you see that ugly kind of Word document that we had originally, and then so much nicer on the right-hand side within WireWheel, where we have the same kind of information in a much more structured and automated way, which is so much more helpful. And I think that the beauty of this is that it's we have these various pieces that we use WireWheel for. So one is kind of the data mapping, data kind of flow automation that gets us all the information around where's data hosted, who has access to it. Then we have the privacy by design checklist and the data protection impact assessment, which are kind of the assessments of a very specific product or process or kind of aspects of a business process that we're looking at. And then we have the vendor questionnaires where we ask the vendors all the important privacy and security due diligence questionnaire. And it all comes together in one place, which is fantastic. And I think kind of, and this is, I mean, admittedly also kind of a forward looking into the future, not happening already right now, unfortunately, but will very soon, is that this really allows us to kind of make sure that we have that Article 30 record of processing that you need to have on the GDPR, very detailed, how you use personal information, and which is updated all the time. It's not just a point of time from 2 years ago. It's updated all the time with all that information that comes together in one place. We can also know when we need to update our privacy statement because we see, oh, there's a new privacy impact assessment. We're doing something new. Oh, we need to update our privacy statement. We can see that again from kind of the central repository that is WireWheel. And what we're doing, and kind of Justin talked a little bit about this, is that we're now going to start with WireWheel, which is really exciting, is kind of getting that visibility of where the data flows and where it's hosted as kind of an internal window initially, where kind of we can give that to our sales folks and other folks that need to kind of answer all their requests for proposal and due diligence questionnaire. But then also ultimately giving that visibility directly to client, where they have a portal where they can go. And rather than having to send us an email, where's my data, who has access to it, they can actually go to a place where they can see that in live and kind of real-time information about where's my data hosted, who has access to it, etc. And I think that's enormously powerful to kind of create that trust with the client and give them that visibility, and also to cut down on all the inefficiencies that is created by getting that email through sales send it to someone else, it comes to me, I go ask other people. So all that is cut down to one wonderful kind of login portal. And I think that's a fascinating prospect to have, both from a client perspective, but also kind of from an internal efficiency perspective.
Yeah, and Stefan, I think what we are seeing is, if you even see how CEOs in public companies are being asked about, in their analyst calls, privacy and security on a regular basis, you see how much CTOs and CISOs are going to be elevated in their companies. And the idea that group is going to start really accelerating the business problems, and you've tackled them in a really interesting way. The idea of creating sales enablement sites that actually just answer the major questions around privacy is important, because it enables your company to sell faster, and it's being driven out of the privacy and security offices. That's exciting to us. We have another customer that's building HR information sites. So when you're hiring employees in Europe, that you could have a nice, easy place for those employees to say, here's what we're collecting about you. Here are the systems we use. And you're being really transparent with your own employees. That excites me, right? Because you're building trust with critical parts of your business. Like, we want to be really transparent with our employees about, here's what we're collecting about you. Here are the systems and why we're doing it. And we're not doing anything like selling your data or using it other than those critical functions. And then, over time, one of the special things about building an application on AWS is that not only where your data is as a SaaS provider, where your customers' data is being stored, right? Where it's being deployed. This is the regional control that as somebody using AWS, well, I want to enable my customers who are building on AWS and using WireWheel to be able to show their customers that information faster and show that there's privacy featured in their service as a result. So there's a real exciting way you can go over time with this to build trust for our customers, which I think is exciting. And Trevor, I assume from your perspective, you're seeing security come up every day as one of the things you talk about. And I suspect privacy is going to be one of those things you see more often from the solutions architect side.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, that whole concept of, you want to buy that fancy car, all of a sudden you're going to start hearing about this fancy car and see that fancy car everywhere you go. As soon as you open your eyes up to this new realm of, making sure that you're keeping data safe for your customers, you quickly realize, how many gaps they're currently in just understanding. Firstly, the amount of education that's out there that's just helping companies be able to comply to this. And this is what I find really exciting about a company like WireWheel, that's actually created a platform that makes it easier for companies not just to be able to achieve it, but to understand what they're doing to achieve it. And that is, extremely powerful. If you don't have something like that in place, you're essentially just going in the dark. You're going blind into this. And, security has been our sort of what we call job zero from day one. And, security I've always seen as, keeping your customers' data secure. But when you open up the concept of privacy, there's a whole bunch of additional questions that were never included in that discussion that is, a fundamental part of that whole process. So absolutely.
Yeah, so this last slide is kind of, because in a lot of small companies, people like myself, they may be the only data protection person. They may even be kind of half time, or even a kind of a small percentage of the time is dedicated to data protection. And then very often it's kind of hard to kind of make that step into automation. And I wanted to use this slide to kind of explain a little bit kind of what my thinking was, why it's actually absolutely worthwhile. Because, the first thing, of course, it needs you to invest some time up front to kind of obviously engage with a vendor, to make sure that you kind of create the necessary linkages in kind of from a cloud perspective. And that takes time and persistence. But if you think about it from a long-term perspective, yes, you make that initial investment, but over time, it's going to save you so much time. I talked about kind of our data privacy by design checklist, the data mapping. If you try to do that manually, it's becoming more and more complicated. The more tools you use, the more enterprise software you use. So I think that's an investment that's absolutely worthwhile. And then, I mean, what I also quite often hear when I kind of talk to colleagues who may kind of a bit more reluctant kind of using these data privacy tools is that you can do a high-level GDPR Article 30 register of kind of all your use of personal information without a kind of an automated tool that gives you granular visibility. And that's absolutely correct. You can do that. You can do that manual. But I think if you kind of look forward, both from a kind of regulatory and from a client perspective, I think that's just not going to cut mustard any longer, much longer. Regulators will say, yeah, but on what basis did you develop this high-level register? How are you sure that what you have on a high level actually reflects all the detail on the ground? And I think if you have a tool, you have the answer straight away. So I think that's where WireWheel and similar tools are extremely powerful, because you can kind of justify what you have kind of in a high-level description of what you use with the information by actually showing all the details that are found in that register. And then as mentioned, I mean, we had this initial Word version of a privacy by design checklist, and that's quite easy to do, particularly lawyers. They like Word documents like myself. So you start with a Word document. But then when you start actually using that in earnest and kind of having, I don't know, dozens of people completing that checklist that kind of in 1 week, keep track of this and making sure everyone completes it and can kind of file questions. Trying to do that via email, it's not possible anymore. So I think you need that automation to kind of help you with efficiency and help also kind of those that actually need to use that checklist. And then, of course, last but not least, I mean, budget is always kind of a big issue. But I think that's just only because you've ignored all the costs that you've internally by not using automation, having all these inefficiencies, because no one counts how much your inefficiencies cost. But if I think how much time I would spend kind of doing this manually with Word document or trying to kind of contact all the different teams to kind of stay on top where data is hosted and where it's going to access it, I mean, I could spend all my time doing that. And that's not where I can create value as a data protection officer. Where I can create value is kind of giving advice and helping a business meeting all the obligations and the client requirements around privacy. So it's really important to kind of spend a bit of money to kind of make sure that you as kind of the privacy person and company can free up your time to focus on what's really important and where you can add value to your company, but not by doing kind of administrative tasks that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, no, and you know, we're seeing just even this year a couple of critical things that are really coming to the forefront. For example, GDPR went into effect in end of May last year. But GDPR is meant to encourage a regular review of what you've done. So now think of all of the companies that declared that they're GDPR compliant. You're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. You have to figure out how you go make sure everything's okay. And going back to your email and trying to find who you sent what to and what you did when, it's fairly onerous, right? And so the idea of having a single pane of glass, you at least know where the last ones went and how to update what and which ones are up. You know, we automate a lot of that, but that's a significant pain point. So if you're looking at what you completed last year and you're trying to think about, okay, I now have 3 to 4 months to make sure that at least with the most urgent systems, we are able to say we're okay again. It becomes really hard to figure out how to start. CCPA is another one, which is if you're really covered by California, you have to start thinking about it. And understanding how you're going to get there is important. If you have a lot of big consumer-facing applications, there's some pretty important disclosure requirements that are coming up around what data elements, what categories you're sharing with what categories of partners, and even gathering that information from your own team can be hard. It really can with everything else you have. So those are the things we're seeing kind of move people a little bit more urgently than there was not a check the box, but there was sort of a relief, I'd say, in June and July of last year. Okay, we got there. But when you realize you have to do it again, that's where it starts to become a little painful if you haven't done anything to automate it. I'd say.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, kind of talking to kind of other colleagues who work in kind of the privacy space as well, I think describe it very accurately. I mean, kind of everyone was rushing and kind of putting all the efforts to kind of meet that 25th of May deadline. And after kind of a bit of kind of, we managed it. And then kind of after a few months, I think came the realization, that's the one-off exercise. How do we maintain all the information? How do you make sure that we keep on top of everything? And again, I mean, yes, you can do that manually, but I think we're going to see more and more companies moving to automated solution because it's just the only way it's going to work, as we've seen in other areas like information security, where we have really established vendors and systems that almost every company is using. And I think privacy is going to go exactly the same way.
Yeah, I want to touch just on automation for a second. Automation is something I live and breathe the DevOps model. If it's going to do something important, can we automate it? And this, challenge, the two things it solves immediately is, we see if there's anything you're doing in a manual task, you have to scale with human resources, right? Like you have to, spend more time as paying people to do that job. That immediately introduces inconsistency, and automation immediately puts consistency in place. It's going to be the same process. You can continuously improving. And I also think, if you don't have automation in place, you're immediately limiting the ability to scale. That's something that I've seen companies that, startup companies that have 4 or 5 developers, but they're able to serve millions of customers just because they've baked automation so that every customer experiences the same consistent experience. That's something that, you want every customer to experience the same thing. How can you, if you're communicating via email about, are we meeting compliance, or, you're following certain privacy situations, how can you provide confidence to all your customers that they're experiencing the exact same experience on the same platform? Automation solves that problem.
So we've covered a lot today, and I suspect we've come up close to our time, but first of all, thank you both. Stefan, I really appreciate you joining us here representing Blackboard, and we're very proud of that partnership. Trevor, really enjoyed it again. I'm looking forward to the next session here in the next couple months.